The days that followed were a blur of tension and uncertainty. My mother's words hung over me like a storm cloud, and I couldn't shake the feeling that time was running out. Capitu and I had built a world of dreams, but reality was closing, in threatening to tear it apart. One evening, as we sat in her yard, I told her everything about my mother's plans, her conversation with José Diaz, and her veiled warnings about our relationship. Capitu listened quietly, her face calm, but her hands restless, twisting a blade of grass between her fingers. When I finished, she looked at me with those deep, searching eyes and said, "What are you going to do?" The question caught me off guard. "What do you mean?" I asked. "I mean, are you going to let her decide your future?" she said, her voice steady, but her gaze intense. "Of course not," I said quickly. "But it's not that simple, Capitu. She's my mother. She's everything I have." "And what about me?" she asked, her voice softer now. "What am I to you?" "Bento?" I reached for her hand, stilling the restless motion of her fingers. "You're everything," I said. "You know that." Her eyes softened, and for a moment, the weight of the world seemed to lift. But only for a moment. "Then fight for us," she said, her voice firm. "Don't let her decide for you. Don't let anyone decide for you." Her words stayed with me, echoing in my mind as I lay awake that night. She was right, of course. I had spent my whole life doing what was expected of me, following the path my mother had laid out. But this was different. This was my heart, my future, and I couldn't let it slip away. The next morning, I resolved to speak to my mother. I rehearsed my words as I dressed, imagining every possible reaction. I told myself I was ready for anything. But when I stood before her, the words wouldn't come. She looked up from her sewing, her expression calm but curious. "What is it, Bento?" she asked. I need to talk to you," I said, my voice faltering. "Of course," she said, setting her work aside. "What's on your mind?" I took a deep breath, trying to steady my nerves. "It's about Capitu," I said finally. Her expression didn't change, but I saw the slightest flicker of something in her eyes. Surprise, perhaps, or maybe disappointment. "What about her?" she asked, her tone careful. "I love her," I said, the words tumbling out before I could stop them. "And I want to be with her." For a moment, she said nothing. Then she sighed, a long, heavy sigh that seemed to carry the weight of the world. "Bento," she said, her voice gentle but firm. "You're young. You don't know what you're saying." "I know exactly what I'm saying," I replied, my voice rising. "I love her and I want to marry her." Her eyes hardened. Then, and her tone grew sharper. "Marriage is not just about love," she said. "It's about responsibility, about family, about the future." "And Capitu? She's not suitable." "Why not?" I demanded. "Because she's not from a wealthy family? Because she's not what you expected?" "Because she's not right for you," she said, her voice cutting through me like a blade. I wanted to argue, to tell her she was wrong, but the words caught in my throat. I'd never seen her like this before, so resolute, so unyielding. As I left her room, I felt a crushing weight settle on my chest. I had stood up to her, but it hadn't been enough. I didn't know what to do, but I knew one thing. I couldn't lose Capitu. That evening I met her in the garden, our usual meeting place. She could see the defeat in my eyes before I even spoke. She said no, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. Capitu nodded, her expression calm but her eyes filled with pain. "I expected as much," she said. "What do we do now?" I asked, my voice breaking. "We keep fighting," she said, her tone firm. "We don't give up, Bento, not now, not ever." Her words gave me strength, but they also filled me with fear. I knew the road ahead would be difficult, and I didn't know if I was strong enough to face it. But for her, I would try. For her, I would fight. The battle for love had only just begun, but every battle has its cost. In the next chapter, I'll tell you how Capitu and I tried to defy the odds, and how the seeds of doubt began to take root. Don't miss what comes next.